Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College here at the City University of New York. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's talk is entitled From Częstochowa to Bayside, the story of the KHC's Torah scroll. Our presentation will focus on how this artifact found its way to the Kupferberg Holocaust Center and the year-long process involved to both restore and remount it. We'll hear presentations from Mr. Harry Rapaport, the artifact's donor, Dr. Mark Zeltzer, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Queensborough, Professor Kat Griefin in QCC's Gallery and Museum Studies program, and myself. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. This event is a collaboration between the KHC and the Gallery and Museum Studies program in the Art and Design Department here at Queensborough. And it builds upon the KHC's longstanding tradition of connecting core themes within Holocaust and human rights education with how they are expressed and taught within and at museums and education centers. Today's program is underwritten by the Ava Bobrow Memorial Fund and is co-sponsored by 6 organizations. They include the Center for Genocide and Human Rights Research in Africa and the Diaspora at Northeastern Illinois University, the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center in White Plains, the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University, the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan University, the Ray Walpole Institute for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at Western Washington University, and the Reef Center for Human Rights and Conflict Resolution at Christopher Newport University. I'd like to thank our colleagues from the Media Services and Digital Transformation departments, including Phil Roncaroni, Jesse Pina, Mahir Hossein, as well as Barana Soman, the KHC's museum coordinator. Before we begin, a reminder for those of you attending in person to please turn off your cell phones. And after the presentation, we'll host a brief Q&A. For those of you watching online, please be sure to put your question in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you here that'll have a question, we'll be sure to pass the mic around. Now, to kick things off, please join me in welcoming today's moderator and my dear colleague, Professor Kat Griefin, who's program coordinator and faculty member in the Gallery and Museum Studies program at Queensborough, and also a faculty member within the CUNY School of Professional Studies. Kat, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Laura. As Dr. Laura Cohen said, I am faculty member and program coordinator for the Gallery Museum Studies program here in Art and Design Department at Queensborough Community College. Very briefly, our program is the only associate's degree offered in the discipline within CUNY, making it a uniquely affordable entry point to the entire museum field in our region. Our students benefit from ongoing partnerships with the Kupferberg Holocaust Center that take the form of these kinds of specialized programs and internships and fellowships that provide hands-on learning at the center. We have some students participating in those here today. And from surveys of our graduates, we know that these substantial opportunities, just like this event, are distinct among community colleges and four-year colleges. And for this reason, this is why our students go on to work at institutions such as the Museum of Jewish Heritage, MoMA, Met, and other important institutions in New York and much further abroad. So I want to just take a moment to thank Dr. Laura Cohen, all the speakers today, and the Kupferberg Center overall and all of its donors for the things they do to make these opportunities possible. So with that said, welcome all community members and students. This program, as Dr. Laura Cohen mentioned, is part of our special Human Rights and the Museum series, where we bring together different topics, but this comes out of a living land acknowledgement with a program that we did a number of years ago on Indigenous genocide on this continent. So every year we do at least 2 programs. The other one, which we will introduce soon, that will be happening in spring 2026, involves Indigenous speakers. We will have Dare Turner from the Brooklyn Museum. While many of our programs in the Human Rights Museum series address the work of other museums, such as the Brooklyn Museum and other collections, I think what is special about the program today is that we are actually getting to take a close look at just one very special and important object in the KHC's own collection. And this event started with a long and interesting and winding conversation with Dr. Laura Cohen about the proper care, storage, display, and interpretation of what the center now understands through this process to be a Torah fragment no longer used for ritual use, and we'll talk about that. And of course, this object takes, if you visited or you visit here in the future, takes pride of place in the Kupferberg Holocaust Center's core collection. We're going to follow the story of this one object in the collection, and you're going to have the opportunity to learn about the specific meaning and the specific history, but also to consider more broadly how museums and centers like the KHC work through the very complex process of caring for, displaying, and interpreting their collections. As is often the case with the center, when they present exhibitions and objects in the collection, they offer us here, this center offers us a very intimate and transparent access to this history through first, or in some cases, secondhand accounts. So today we're offered that privilege of proximity through the generosity of two individuals. Foremost, the donor of this Torah fragment, Harry Rapaport, and also Mark Zelcher, who was essential in fully identifying the artifact and helping us understand how to display and interpret it. So as we hear from Dr. Laura Cohen, and we hear from Harry Rapaport, and we hear from Mark Zelcher, we'll follow the story of the object, of the artifact, and learn how it was found and preserved, how it became part of the Kupferberg's collection, how restoration was considered, how community members played a role, how the object is cared for and displayed today, and finally how the interpretive text that you'll see when you visit the center was written. So with that brief outline, I'm happy to hand back the mic to Dr. Laura Cohen, and I look forward to the presentations and also our conversation, which will close the program. Thank you all. It's great to be here and be part of this program. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Professor Griffin. So I am going to introduce our featured guest, and at the same time, I am going to share our screen. Mr. Harry Rapaport is a retired court reporter from the U.S. District Court in New York. He was born in a German displaced persons camp in 1946 to two Holocaust survivors. His mom was interned in the Polish ghetto in Łódź, and then in a number of concentration camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau. And his dad escaped from the notorious death site of Treblinka. We have the great honor of introducing Mr. Harry Rapaport to talk a lot about his story and how the Torah came to be at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you again, Dr. Cohen. Thank you to Dr. Mark Seltzer. Thank you to Professor Kat Griffin for bringing this program together for the rededication of a Holocaust Torah. I also need to thank Dr. Bill Shulman, who was the director of this Holocaust Center back in the late 1980s when I brought back 38 Holocaust Torahs out of Poland. I was born in a displaced persons camp in Bad Reichenhall, Germany, but my wife, Penny Rapaport, also the daughter of two Holocaust survivors, was also born in Germany at the same time. It came to pass that in 1988 and 1989, I learned that Torah scrolls in the town of Częstochowa, the town that my father is from, and the town that my in-laws are both from. They actually knew each other before the war. I'm not going to get into the story of how we met in Denver, Colorado. That's a story for another time. But here is the beautiful display that Dr. Laura Cohen worked so hard with everyone else and so many other people to put together. Much nicer, much more welcoming than the previous display, and you'll see and you'll learn why. But my mother and father, the top picture, Holocaust survivors. I'll introduce them to you in a moment, and my in-laws, Holocaust survivors. My mom is from Łódź, Poland, and my in-laws and my father are both, like I said, from Częstochowa, Poland. September 4th, 1939, is when the Germans came into Poland, into Częstochowa, Poland. My mother-in-law at that time was just a girl of 12 years old. Down the block, my father-in-law lived. He was 19 years old. He was the oldest of 5, and my mother-in-law was the oldest of 5 girls. My mom was 18 years old when the war began. She was engaged to be married, and her fiance was killed very early on in the war. My dad was 32. He was married, he had a child. His first wife died of childbirth, and he had remarried a few years before the war. September 4th, 1939, the Bloody Monday. That's when the Nazis came into Częstochowa, Poland. That's when people were immediately arrested, and 300 people were killed that very first day when the Nazis entered town. My father-in-law, his father, my grandfather, was the first one to be killed in Częstochowa, Poland on September 4th, 1939. My dad took his body at night, himself, with his own shovel, and he buried him in the Jewish cemetery in Częstochowa, Poland. It was the beginning of the war. He was still able to erect this mitzvah, this tomb, this gravestone. And then the war began. And the yellow star, the demeaning yellow star, meant to isolate and identify all the Jews. They were forced from their homes. They were forced into a ghetto all over Poland, all over occupied Europe. They were forced out of their homes. My mother-in-law, the baby isn't in this picture. My mother-in-law circled. Like I said, she was 12 years old. Her and the girl next to her, 10 years old. They're each 2 years apart. They were forced into slave labor. Yes, children forced into slave labor. And her job, working 12, 18 hours a day on a table with other girls, was to load bullets. They had small fingers. They were little girls. And that was their job. And how lucky they were, because they had to work. They received an extra ration every day, an extra bowl of soup. And you know what these brave little girls did? They would oftentimes maybe take a bite, or maybe not even take a bite of their hard, crusted old bread. They would put it in their pocket because there were children at home, and there was a mom at home, and they didn't get those extra rations. Forced labor of children of the ghetto. We know that 1.5 million out of the 6 million were children, forced to wear the star, forced to starve, died in the streets if they were lucky enough to die and not go to the concentration camps and to be gassed and burned. 1.5 million children. Can you count 1.5 million? There was a decree in 1942 that all children under the age of 10 in the Lodz ghetto were to be taken and gassed in vans because they didn't have these enormous gas chambers and concentration camps completely set up. Gassed them in vans where children were watching other children being gassed. A mom saying goodbye to her child in the Lodz ghetto, and then taken to concentration camps. It's a famous picture in all Holocaust centers. Look at this girl. She was hungry yesterday. She was hungry last week, and if she's alive a week from this photograph, she'd be hungry then. Treblinka. Between September 22nd and October 8th, 1942, in Częstochowa, Poland, there was a mass deportation of 39,000 Jews, even more than the 29,000 Jews who populated the town before the war, because during the war, they brought people from outskirts, from small villages, into the Częstochowa ghetto. My dad went with his mom and his wife, who was 7 months pregnant, and his 7-year-old daughter, Esterka, to Treblinka that day. He was probably the only one of the 5,000 who went to Treblinka, who were deported and transported to Treblinka on these awful cattle cars for over a day. He was probably the only one to have survived. When he was taken off the train, the men and the women were separated, and his wife was 7 months pregnant, and she couldn't descend the cattle car fast enough, and Kurt Franz, the deputy commander, had a penchant for taking his bayonet. When he saw a pregnant woman, he would stab her in the stomach, and he saw his wife killed and his daughter crying for her father the last time he saw her. And Esterka Rapaport, my half-sister, died on October 3rd, 1942. My dad himself was naked in line to go to the gas chamber when there was a person sorting clothes who threw him a pair of pants, a friend of his from his hometown, and he said, "Moshe, please, put these on. Sort the clothes with me." And that's how he survived. And he became a Sonderkommando in the Treblinka concentration camps, where second only to Auschwitz, 925 Jews there were killed. And he was responsible for taking gold teeth out of the bodies before they were cremated, for gathering the jewelry and the rings, and the electrified barbed wire. But he managed to escape, and I'll talk about his escape because it was so brutal in the concentration camps. When people would say to him, "What's happening? Where are we going? What's the smell?" My father would sometimes say, "That's your family. If they're not there yet, they'll be there soon." In the concentration camp, it was his responsibility as one of his ordeals, one of the orderlies' ordeals, one of his tasks is to take the bodies from the gas chamber and insert them into the ovens to be burned. But Dad escaped. He organized an escape party 3 months after arrival with 9 people, 3 groups of 3. And only the first group that my dad was in managed to escape. It took a month to get back to their hometown. A month. When he got back to his hometown and snuck back into the ghetto and told the people what was happening, they said, "Moshe, you're crazy. Moshe has gone mad." They didn't want to believe him. Who could believe such a thing at the time? At any time. Even now, knowing what happened 80 years ago, it's such a difficult thing to believe. Auschwitz. 1.1 million people were killed. My mom was taken to Auschwitz on August 7th, 1944. August 7th, 1944, her dad received a note that one person from the family was kept intact late into the war, August of 44, and he came home one day and said, "Tomorrow morning I'm going to the transport, to the Umschlagplatz, the gathering place, because we need to fulfill the quota. One from our family has to go." And my mom, who was in her early 20s at the time, snuck out in the middle of the night and wrote a note and said, "Dad, you are the father of the family, pater familias. The family needs you, and I am going." And she left, and he saw the note, and he ran after her. And when he found her, she was already on the back of a truck being taken to the railroad station, the last time she saw her father. Auschwitz lined up 5, 5, and 5. Germans could count them easily that way, 5, 10, 15. And the war was coming to a close. The Russians were coming from the east. The Americans and the Canadians and the British, the Allied forces, were coming from other directions. And they heard the war in Częstochowa. My dad was in the Częstochowa ghetto still, along with my in-laws. And on January 17th, they were liberated by the Russians. But on January 16th, one day before that liberation, the Germans picked up whoever they can and sent them into a death march. And my dad was on that death march on January 16th, 1945, one day before the camp was before the ghetto was liberated, and he was sent back to Germany again to be put in concentration camps until he was liberated by the British on April 15th, 1945. And also in the town, before they were liberated, my mother-in-law with her sister, young girls, came home one day, and there was no mom and there was no 3 younger sisters because the Germans, the Nazis, took them to a pit. And they shot them and buried over 1,000 Jews that particular day. But they did have a liberation. The war did come to an end, and how happy they were to be liberated, but then for many, it was the first time they looked and realized and felt that they were alone. There was no family, there was no home. Over 10,000 were unburied dead, were found there. And 13,000 died since the liberation, because this is what they looked like. And they found that the food that they were giving, the sustenance, was too much for their bodies. And people died of all sorts of problems with intaking all that sustenance, all these calories that their body couldn't handle yet. It needed to be done little at a time. But there was a resurgence of growth. People had no one. They got married early. My mother-in-law got married to my father-in-law, who was a hero during the war because he kept on going over the ghetto wall and bringing food home for the people close to him, my mother-in-law's family. And they got married. He was then 19. She was 17 when they got married. She was 18 when she had her child, my wife. He was a few years older. Her younger sister that survived with her, who worked in that munitions factory with her, she was just 15 when she got married and 16 when she had a child, because people needed family, they needed love. That's my mother and father in the center over the ribbon at a Holocaust commemoration in the DP camp, and that's them in the front of the bicycle, because there was a renewal of life. Children were born all over the place. My mother-in-law married, she was liberated on January 17th, married 3 months later. My parents were liberated on April 15th, and they married a few months later as well. But then my parents wanted to go back to Poland. That was their home. They were Polish citizens. They wanted to go back and see if they had any family. They didn't know yet that the family wasn't alive. So they went across the border, hopped on a train. They went back into Poland. They went to Lodz. My mother went to her house, and there was other people living there. They didn't let her in, but through the window she saw her mother's curtains and her mother's furniture in the house. And they were homeless, and they went to Częstochowa, where my dad said, let's start life again. And there he went to the cemetery to pay his respects to his father. And he knew where the grave was because he counted that one night when he buried him 25 paces from a water well where people washed their hands when they symbolically left the cemetery. And he found the well, but he didn't find the grave. But people told him the Poles took a lot of the good marble and they used all over town for sidewalk. 2 weeks it took him. And he found the tombstone, the stone, the gravestone that marked his father's grave. And he had it encased in another stone. He had another stone because he had no place for his mother's resting place, for his then wife's resting place, and for his daughter Esterka's resting place. And there he had it encased in another tombstone to commemorate both of them. And they wanted to leave Poland because during the Celts pogrom on July 4th, 1945, my father's best friend was one of the 40-some-odd people who were killed. And anti-Semitism was great. Anti-Semitism is still great. We still feel it. But then they decided they had to get out of Poland, back to Germany, to an American displaced persons camp so they can get out of the life that they were currently living. And then when they went over to the border, which was open when they came back to Poland, was now closed, and they were arrested and picked up, and they were tried and spent 30 days in jail when my mother was 6 months pregnant with me. But life in the DP camp, who will take them? Where do I go? There are quotas all over the place. And then living there, like we do on Christmas time and holidays time, we send out cards. They didn't even have people to send cards to, but they managed to have cards made up in 1947 and in 1948 to send whatever relatives, distant relatives they may have found or friends that they made, and how happy they were. On May 18th, 1949, when we came to the United States when I was 2.5 years old, and we eventually became citizens of this great country that gave us our freedom of religion, freedom to live as you wanted, with all the freedoms given to all Americans that we cherish so deeply. 1950, 5 years after the liberation, we were living in New Jersey, and you think it's a normal family, and it looked like it, but we had one bedroom, and I heard their horror, their nightmares, day in and day out. It wasn't easy growing up as a child of Holocaust survivors. This is just 5 years after the war. Those memories were fresh. They stayed fresh their whole life. But in 1962, they arrested in Germany Kurt Franz, and my dad was asked to come to testify against him for his notorious crimes. And he was asked by the prosecutor, can you stand and identify and point to the person that you're testifying against? And he did, and he got up and he passed out with a complete emotional breakdown. And that was picked up by the Associated Press, and it was in the news all over the place. And what's important, number one, is Kurt Franz was convicted when my dad got out of the hospital for a few days, and with his testimony and others, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment, but released after 28 years and died a free man, Kurt Franz, deputy commandant of the concentration camp. And at that time, he went back to the cemetery in Poland for the first time since the war to pay respects to his father's grave. But also, because the Associated Press picked up that this man testifying in Germany, Holocaust survivor, passed out, this story reached the Associated Press, and the whole time he was in the United States, my dad was looking for a previous brother-in-law from his first wife because he thought there might be a picture. And he printed periodicals and newspaper ads looking for the person. Grimkowski was his name. And he couldn't, wherever he went, wherever he saw a Holocaust survivor, do you know Grimkowski? And finally, after that news article of him passing out on the witness stand, he got a call, says, "Hi, I live in the Bronx. My name is Grauman. I am Grimkowski." The next day, we went to the Bronx, and he got a picture of his daughter. One of the most emotional moments of my life is when my dad saw that picture and practically passed out over that picture. Here he is on his yurt site, the annual commemoration of his daughter's death, with the picture all over the place. In 1980, my dad was terminal with cancer, and he took me and my wife, Penny, to the Częstochowa, town of Częstochowa, to see the grave. He wanted to show me the grave so I can continue pilgrimages to the grave. But this is what a cemetery looked like 40 years after the war at that time. This is what it looked like. We couldn't find it. It was a hot day in the summer with underbrush all over the place. And as we were walking out of the cemetery, my wife tripped over some rocks. And my dad looked, and we moved the brush, and there was the foundation of the well, the water well, and he knew in which direction to face and counted 25 paces, and there, after finding that well, he found his father's grave, and we cleaned it up, and we paid respects to it. It was shadowed by trees that weren't there when his father was buried. I've been back 5 times. And then, from that contact that we had in Częstochowa, Poland in 1980, I learned that there's a mikveh building, a place where people go ritual bath. And in that mikveh building, what was once a mikveh building, is in the attic, Torah scrolls and sacred books. And it was locked, and we couldn't go there. But 8 years later, I found that we had access to this mikveh building. And we went there. And we went in, and the first year we found 7, here's 5 of the 7 scrolls. We weren't prepared for what we found. And we went back a year later, and a year later we found 31 more scrolls. And we brought duffel bags that time, and we filled the duffel bags with the scrolls and the books, and we got permission from the Jewish community in Częstochowa, all 3 of them, to go to Warsaw, to the larger Jewish community, and we got a letter to be able to take these scrolls out of Poland. And we brought them to the United States. And 15 of these scrolls were restored, and they're being used in synagogues, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, all over the country, all over the country. Here I'm showing off all these scrolls that we picked up. And we had a press conference, and the young fellow that you see there is now, his name is Jacob Lebens, and I went with his father and him, and he is now the Holocaust director of a similar place just like we're at Kupferberg, at Rapaport College in Suffern, New York. One of the restored Torahs went to a bungalow colony of Holocaust survivors, and they used it. And when they weren't using it during the summer, it went to the Forest Hills Jewish Center. And there's one at the United States Air Force Academy, where I was for quite a few years in the 60s, and in synagogues in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, in Long Island, in Denver, Colorado. One in a synagogue maybe a half a mile from here, and my 4 granddaughters, 4 of them, were bat mitzvah, as many, many other boys and girls from these Holocaust Torahs, sister Torahs, to the one that we have here, displayed so beautifully at this rededication by the people involved. Such a beautiful thing for the community and for people from outside of the community to come and see and share and feel the emotions of a survivor of the Holocaust, a Torah survived the Holocaust. And the reason it's just a section is because when we got these scrolls, many of them, they were rolled, but the outside roll from being there for so many years, were the leather or the parchment was so decrepit that we had to take it off. And we use the scrolls and we piece together, just like you copy and paste, we piece things together like a puzzle to make 15 scrolls. And the scroll that we have here is one of the sections that remained after we took as many pieces to piece together 15 scrolls. And there's my daughter Brenda, and how emotional it was on St. Patrick's Day a year and a half ago. She went to Poland with a group of women, and she was able to say her prayers at my grandfather's grave, her great-grandfather, killed on September 4th, 1939, by the advancing Nazis. So I thank you all for coming and listening and being part of this. It's so important to me that you folks are here and that people see and can understand what the scroll is. I thank you all. I thank Dr. Mark for giving us, and you'll hear from him, the meaning of this section that's displayed. It's quite important and it's very meaningful. Thank you very much, Dr. Cohen, for everything you've done to put this together. You started it along with Dr. Schulman so many years ago when he reached out to me. And thank you, Professor Catt. Thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure for being part of this. Thank you.
I needed that second to kind of ground myself. We've had many conversations, Harry, but I've not heard this presentation or the full story, and I think that it really speaks to the role of small centers like ours that have a big mission to educate people about the connection between the Holocaust and the present, and at the same time to be repositories of local memory, recognizing that we're also very small and we can't necessarily preserve everything, or in some cases we have things here, this is a project we're working on now, to kind of figure out what do we have here and what is our responsibility to either keep it or to share it with other institutions where more people might have access to it. And so what we're going to do now is talk about the other part of this project. So Harry's talked very eloquently and passionately and very movingly about the story of his family, and that's an integral part of this story. So I joined the Kupferberg Holocaust Center as the executive director in 2019, and this was the display of the primary exhibition space in the KHC, which we call the glass box. And if you're looking on the screen to the left, you'll see angular glass, and this symbolizes Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass on November 9th and 10th, 1938, when the Nazis committed state-sponsored terrorism against the Jewish population for the first time. And the centerpiece of the glass box was the Torah. And you'll see that there is this very long structure that's attached to the ceiling, sort of a silver structure that's also attached to the floor. And this is where the Torah sat for many years. And one of the challenges is that over time, the Torah became a little unmoored in it, and it wasn't entirely clear how we could get into the artifact to represent it because of this structure, which put so much, made it very complicated. And so I wish I could say it was a simple process, but in fact, it took us quite a long time, and there were many, many conversations that took place. And so before we even get further, I just want to acknowledge all of the team members and people that were inherent to this process. Myself, Veronica Soman, our museum coordinator. We had many people from Queensborough Community College, including the president of the college, Christine Mangino, as well as the VP of Strategy, who oversees the campus's cultural centers, including the KHC, Stephen DiDio. The Buildings and Grounds Department was involved. Two of the members of the media services team helped us move things and get things mounted. Kat Griffin from the Museum and Gallery Studies program was integral, as was Dr. Mark Seltzer, who we'll introduce in a moment. Clearly, Harry is a huge piece of this. And then something else that was very unexpected is one day we had a donor, the chairman of the Lieber Philanthropies, was visiting Queensborough and came to the center and the college asked for us to give him a tour. And immediately, he not only understood the role of the center, but knew a lot about the history of the Holocaust and gave us a very meaningful donation. And he asked that the money be put towards something that would be very high impact, that would really connect with a lot of people. And so at some point, we realized this was the opportunity to think about the restoration of the Torah. But that's one piece of the story, because then there's the technical components of this. And so after a lot of fits and starts, we were able to reach out to colleagues at the Museum of Jewish Heritage and some exhibition consultants who then put us in touch with experts. And we worked with Eric Arajo, who is an artist and mount maker. He works at the Museum of Modern Art. We worked with Maria Paula Armelin, who is an exhibitions registrar and was really sort of the project manager. We worked with Willie Chan and Rabbi Akiva Oppen and Robin Schwartz, who not only helped us create the vitrine, meaning the plastic housing, but also looked at the Torah itself, and then Robin, who created the text. Dr. Jacob Lebens, who Harry spoke about, was 13 when he went to Poland with his father and Harry to help retrieve these Torahs, is a colleague of mine, and I had no idea what his connection was to the story till I did a Google search and realized, and so that's been very meaningful. And I also want to acknowledge the work of Dr. Marissa Hollywood, who was the staff member here for quite a long time, and we had many conversations about this. So that's the one piece of it, which is it takes a village. But then there's many steps and many conversations that went through. And I promise this is the only other text slide. After this, it's all pictures. So we had to think about, and in no particular order, the display structure, meaning that piece that was touching the ceiling to the floor, which was not something that was easy for us to move. We also wanted to think as we were going forward. This center was built in 2009. It's very beautiful, but it makes it very challenging to update things, right? There's this sense that everything was going to stay the same in perpetuity, and that's not the case. And so at the same time, the staff is very small, and so we have to constantly figure out how are we fixing and reimagining the infrastructure here, at the same time paying tribute to the things that are here and the connection to the past. Something else that's very important is we're having this event, and most of our public events now happen in the classroom, but many events do happen in the glass box, and we need the ability to actually move artifacts around. So if that's the structure, we're also thinking about the object itself and what was the history, and I'll show you some photos in a minute of how it was originally displayed. We wanted to be very mindful of the physical condition, also thinking about religious considerations, what could we touch, what was being displayed, what the Torah represents and what it's not, and also the connection to the center's mission. We were thinking about the display itself, including things like the angle of the mount and the material and the fabric that we were going to use to display it, and what materials would be used to hold it in place. Then there was a lengthy process to draft the copy to describe the Torah, which we'll get into, and then thinking about, again, what are the donors' requirements, thinking about a project report that we need to put together, and overall this took about 8 months from the actual start to now. So you're looking at some photos up close, and one of the biggest issues that we had is that the Torah kind of fell off of its mount. But the bottom photo also shows you this was the tag that appeared, so just very little information. It says a Holocaust Torah scroll, a century-old Torah rescued from Częstochowa, Poland in 1988 by Mr. and Mrs. Harry Rapaport. It cannot be used for ritual purposes. That was it. And then if you look at the vertical photo, you'll see that it's in this plastic case called a vitrine, but we cannot get into it. And we tried many times, and my predecessor tried as well, to kind of no avail. So the first thing when we started working with the mount maker, Eric, was to put together some schematics. How would this look in the overall space of the glass box? And what would be the dimensions when you look at it in person? The next time all of you go to a museum, look very critically at the items that are on display, and the boxes that they are in, and your relationship to it. And it seems like that would be a really simple process. It's absolutely not. Every single thing in it has been considered. The next thing was, I asked for something that would give us longevity, even though it's not necessarily used. And that is a plastic vitrine that has a little fly or a little door in the back with locks, so that in the future, someone who isn't familiar with this object, if we needed to get into it, we could. In addition to being able to unscrew and lift the plastic box off the mount, which is very heavy, we have the option to at least get our hands in there. So that's something that's very important as we think about longevity. The next piece was Eric and his team came to remove the Torah from the plastic vitrine. And then, these are all museum people, they carefully and with great love picked up the artifact. They've got gloves on. They put it in a box that they constructed, and they wrapped it in plastic. So it was all treated with tremendous respect, as it would be done in a museum. So the next process was we worked with the college's facilities team, and lo and behold, one day the silver structure was removed. And it changed immediately the optics in the glass box. All of a sudden, it didn't feel, when you were looking at it, as if it was chopped up. There was space and breathing space. And that was a conversation that Erica and Maria mentioned several times about how they didn't understand design-wise why that structure had even been placed there. Eric is an artist, so on his own, and with measurements we agreed on, he fabricated a brand new mount, and a mount that had wheels in it so that we could move it ourselves, so that it wouldn't encumber us from having public events where in the past, when the Torah was hanging from the ceiling, we would put the video camera there and people would knock into it. So I'm now going to introduce Dr. Mark Zeltzer, who is an assistant professor of philosophy here at Queensborough. And you might ask, well, what does the philosophy professor have to do? Well, Dr. Zeltzer had reached out about doing presentations around medical ethics, and we were giving a tour. I was giving him a tour of the center one day, and we were having this conversation, and he goes, oh, as he was looking at the Torah, that's Deuteronomy. And what you're staring at there are the 10 Commandments and the Shema. And I went, I had no idea. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Zeltzer, if you'd like to come up and talk a little bit about the process of handling this object.
Thank you so much. First, just thanks everyone for having me here. Thanks so much, Harry and Kat, and I'm going to thank Laura separately. This is very meaningful for me, just being part of this. But I have 4 grandparents that survived the Holocaust as well, and so this is particularly significant from my perspective as well. 2 from towns not far from Częstochowa, 2 from Czechoslovakia. So, so thanks so much for having me. I want to thank Laura in particular, just via, hopefully not calling out another museum, but telling you a story, one that it was in the news about a month ago, literally a month ago. A prominent war museum in London had an exhibit, and the exhibit, and I wrote this down, right? The exhibit, it was about the Holocaust, and it mentioned somewhere in one of their plaques that under the provisions of the Nuremberg race laws, that a person was defined as Jewish based on how many observant grandparents they had. Now, almost any Holocaust scholar would tell you observant grandparents had nothing to do with the race laws in Nazi Germany. And so some historians wrote to the War Museum, and the War Museum essentially said, this is our exhibit, we're keeping it as it is. And they really sort of moved on. And I want to thank Laura, because this is sort of in great contrast to what one feels like when they approach a museum as some other institution that does its own thing and isn't at all responsive to the public. I think this was, my experience here was not only responsive, it was sort of amazingly responsive, and it led to a real transformation. So I thank you so much for working with us on this. My experience is, I'm not an expert, I'm not a Holocaust anything. I'm not a historian. I'm just a guy who walked in. I teach a class in this college, and I use this space once a semester because it's poignant. And I was looking at the exhibit, and something wasn't right. Anybody who's an observant Jew has this feeling whenever they watch TV and they see observant Jews on TV, they're like, no, they've got it wrong. And you're smiling because you've been there. And you ask, like, why didn't they just talk to me? I had have fixed everything, and then they could have got it right. And I had that experience when I looked at the Torah. It was an experience that the exhibit was fine, everything was great, but a better written plaque would have cleared up everything. And something was fishy. And I came in, I didn't know what this Torah was. It clearly wasn't a Torah. It was, right, a Torah has, a Torah scroll, you see it's written in columns. A typical Torah scroll has 245 columns. This one, you look at it and like it just wasn't big enough. It has 20 or 30. And I'm thinking, why does it say Torah scroll? 20 or 30 columns does not a Torah scroll make. So I thought maybe it's one of those incredibly, incredibly rare scrolls of just Deuteronomy. There's maybe a handful that were ever written in the history of Torah scrolls in 2,000 years, and that didn't make sense either. So, and then I looked more, and the poles were too scrawny. I mean, if you see the poles there of the original poles, they cannot support a real Torah scroll. They are too thin. And if you look on top of the Torah scroll, you can't see it here, but there was a little thin piece of plastic, and plastic only became a thing in the synthetic plastic was developed in the 1920s and 30s, and they weren't on Torah scrolls in Poland that early. So I was wondering, like, what happened? There was a story here that the plaque wasn't telling, and so immediately Laura and I went to Harry and said, "What is this?" And then it all made sense. It was not a Torah scroll. It was what was left of a Torah scroll that had been moldering, for half a decade in Poland. Most of it, maybe 90% of it, cracked and was unusable and was undisplayable even. And so it became clear that much of it was missing, and it was restored in a way that made it aesthetic. It made it displayable in some sort of way. They took poles that were used for other ritual objects, not Torah scrolls, and put them on, and they taped it on, which one typically wouldn't do, and it was open, to a place where it looked good to open it to, and what we saw was the undamaged part. And so what we did is this started our journey. Laura and I drove down to Long Island to a guy who, yeah, we have pictures. We drove down to Lawrence, New York, right, the 5 towns right outside. We went to a shop of someone who handles Torah scrolls and other scrolls. He writes them, he repairs them, and he said, he's seen them. And our big concern was, could we remount this? Is it? It's clearly not fixable. 90% of it is gone. But he said, certainly it's not only fixable. It's good as is. Scrolls are written in sheets. There are a few columns to a sheet, and the sheets are sewn together with dried deer sinew called gid, and I was worried that after a while they would snap and break. He's like, no, these are great, they're fine. He looked at them, he handled them, he said this'll be fine to display, and it was great. And so when we got there, we remounted it. We had a few choices to make. We were able to open it and keep it open to when it was first displayed. It was kind of unclear where it was open to. When we displayed it now, we were lucky that it was just the fragment is a fragment of Deuteronomy, the 5th book of the Bible, the 5th book of 5 in a Torah scroll. And we were fortunate that there was an interesting passage that was still preserved in the scroll. The passage, as you can see, is the passage of the 10 Commandments. If you see, in the middle section there's like some funny spaces. That's how the 10 Commandments are written in the Torah scroll, with a funny space. And if you look on the column on the left, if you can see it, there's one letter that looks like it's in bold. And that's the Shema prayer. That's the last letter of the Shema prayer. The Shema prayer is the prayer that it's the profession of faith that Jewish people have had since biblical times, 2,000-3,000 years ago, and it's sadly the sentence that countless Jews went to their death uttering. So it was very significant that we could that piece was preserved, that we're able to display that alongside the Ten Commandments, and they happen to be together. The last thing we had to do, technically, to make this exhibit was write a plaque. And if you know, right, if you know, if you've ever heard, a camel is a horse designed by a committee, and we were really worried that we wouldn't get that we would have a camel of a plaque. We had a lot of people trying to get input and making sure that we, said what needed to be said. And if you give everybody a say, everybody's going to want to put their 2 cents into it, and it's going to look awkward and clunky. But miraculously, we worked seamlessly together. Everybody seemed to have a good idea of what had to be explained, what had to be shown, the things that should be on the plaque, on the 2 plaques that are currently on the exhibit, and it worked fine. So we got all the information we need. We wanted to explain what a Torah is, why it's on a scroll, and what passages we were displaying, the context of the Torah itself, how the Torah got to the KHC, and something about the donor. So we put all that in the plaque, and it has a whole lot of information, and it should be good for generations of people to come in, see it, understand it, even if they don't really know what a Torah is and what it means to the Jewish people. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a better feel for the process that we went through to make this what it is. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mark. And there was a few other photos, so there was more to be done. Once we got back from the scribe, and I just want to point out, in the upper left, we arrived with a box. The Torah was wrapped in paper, covered in plastic. Immediately, the rabbi took it out and was touching it with his bare hands and pulling it, and we were like, oh my God. And we left there. I was like, he's like, throw the box away. I'm like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do with this? How are we going to get it home? So he rolled it up and he stuck it in a plastic bag. And that's how we left. So we're like, okay. So it's important because I can hear people, and I'm staring at Kat now, like the question about should we be wearing gloves when we're touching this? All of these kinds of conversations were happening, but here was the rabbi saying it's completely fine, and he's pointing out even in places where somebody had tried to redo some of the lettering, and it was really interesting. And there's a hole in the middle on the right side of the image, the right vertical image, there's like a hole in the middle of the Torah. We thought the thread is coming undone. He goes, no, that's not a mess with the thread. That's actually the place where the scribe inserts like a level, so that as he's writing it, all of the lines are straight. We had no idea. So eventually, Eric came back. And so we spent time thinking about the angle of that mount, and we decided that we would have kind of a blue fabric. And most importantly, now we had a Torah that was no longer going to have poles. So we had a conversation about how would it remain open. And we wound up using this sort of thick plastic strips to keep it down. So we came back, he mounted it, and then we had, I think, Phil that day came in and helped lift the vitrine, meaning the plastic case, back on top. But then there was another question. And if you look at the lower right image, as the Torah was nearly finished, we still didn't have a label describing what it was, and we had to think about how much text we were going to put on. And in this case, we decided to add an additional mount on the exterior of it that would give us flexibility to tell the story. And so eventually, those panels got printed, and there was a sprint, and another colleague helped us because, of course, as things go, the mount that the copy was going to go on was shorter than the text when it arrived. So at the last minute, we also had to reach out to some people on campus to help us. And there are 2 labels. So one was the story that we talked about, that Mark talked about, which is the story of the Torah. But then there's also a separate label, which you'll often see also at museums. And this is just basic identification. So as Mark mentioned, this isn't a full scroll, it's a fragment. We wanted to identify the materials that were used, the provenance, to be very clear that this was incomplete and not could not be used for religious purposes, and to identify the donor, in this case, Harry and his wife. And so we started this journey. The upper left is how the Torah was mounted and displayed for several years from 2009 to a couple months ago, and now this is what it looks like in the space. So thank you all for being here. And I wanted to transition to Q&A. So we're going to turn the mics off for 1 second, and for those of you online, we'll be right with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the amazing presentations. I think it's really, it certainly, looking at the museum studies students and museum visitors from the community and the crowd, it's rare we get to have such a full history of one very, very special object that certainly warrants that, and also get to look at how all the things that come together to make it possible to see how that object is displayed, how that artifact is displayed when we visit. So thank you all for your parts in making it possible. Laura, just a quick technical question. You're looking at questions online. Do you want to start with a question online, or shall I get the conversation going?
Get the conversation.
Okay, fantastic. So one of the things that struck me about the story of this object and its history is all of the specialized knowledge, and I don't mean museum people, but the specialized knowledge by people who are close to this material. And what we often call now in the field of museum studies, the fact that the KHC was opened to bringing in that specialized knowledge and sharing the authority in order to give a full story. What I'm really talking about in the museum world, something that's happening a lot now, is community collaboration. And I do think that it's sometimes complicated. We worry that the things come out of community collaboration, like you said about the interpretive text, can be what comes out of many brains and does not somehow make sense in one piece of text. But I think that's not the case. I think the fact that the center opened up here in so many ways ended up with something that is really, really special and really accessible and thoughtful and smart. I think I might like to start, if you don't mind, with me passing this to Laura and asking, what was it like collaborating with the community of donors, of second-generation survivors, of faculty around this? What was that process like for you and the other staff here? Again, we're lucky to have Marissa Hollywood, who was some of that early staff, here in the audience.
It's a great question. And I'd like to highlight Dr. Marissa Hollywood was our longtime associate director at the center, and while she was here, a very important artifact was also donated. It was a jacket that belonged to Ben Perez, Benjamin Paretsky, and it's an original jacket from the concentration camp of Dachau. And we did an exhibition around that. There was a tremendous amount of research that Marissa and former director Dan Lesham did to not only identify that jacket, but to realize that the son and daughter of Ben had no idea what happened to him. And so they were able, with working with the family then donated all of the documents that Ben had held on to that talk about the journey of his journey in life, his journey in the camps, and his journey for restitution. So that was also a model here. I think that the difference for us with the Torah was that we had far less information. And we had two big issues going into it. One was we hadn't been in contact yet with Harry, and the other was that we were stuck with this silver structure, and we could not, for the life of us, figure out how to get rid of the structure. And the structure alone created a barrier in a way, because we realized we had to get rid of the structure in order to get the Torah out. But to get rid of the structure required a lot of institutional support. And that wasn't easy, and required us to have conversations with the president and with other stakeholders to get the facilities department to come in. And then that triggered a larger conversation. And again, the third piece was a conversation with Mark, like, oh, what is even in this? So then we started to ask for help. and reaching out to other colleagues at specifically the Museum of Jewish Heritage who might be able to give us some insight. And then it became, I know a guy, I know a person, and the team kind of came together. But at every single step, it was a lot. And I just want to also acknowledge Harry, because you were really open during this process also. We kept contacting you like, hey, what about the polls? You're like, oh, well, here's why we put the polls together. And hey, here's the story behind it. You don't have this quite right. And then you were in the office the other day with Penny, and I happened to be having a conversation with Jacob Lebens, who is the young man in the pictures and who runs the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Rapaport College. So there we were, sort of doing what we do and kibitzing. So it all kind of felt like a real important opportunity, and you were also like invaluable in guiding us, Kat, because you really kind of gave us insight along the way. Like even we're going back to the label, but I've never written that kind of label before, and we had some special things we had to think about. And you were very kind in explaining there is no one right way to do this, but it takes a lot of effort to try to craft these things. We're currently updating an exhibition in this classroom, and there's no such thing as writing straightforward copy. And when you start to get up close to things and looking at how they were written and understanding the balance between the visual representation and the factual representation, that's a much larger conversation, and it's very challenging to do.
Thank you, Laura. I'd love to get some questions from the audience. I have a lot of museum studies and art history students here who are assigned to participate. So I'd love to see some raised hands. Also, community members who have questions. It's very special to have Harry here, of course, to talk to. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this. Do we have a second mic in the audience, or is this the one mic? Okay, I'm going to bring. In that case, I'm going to bring you the. Actually, shall I have him speak and then I'll. Yeah, go ahead, and if you ask your question, I'm going to have to repeat it into the mic, but then we won't be running back and forth. So, go ahead.
There was a material that you said that coated the scroll. I wanted to know how did that protect it over time? And like you mentioned, it was a deer something, like it was related to deers.
So that's a great question. The student is asking, what are some of the materials that protected the scroll? And also, you'd referred to, I think, either sinew or deer sinew that was part of the material or makeup of the scroll. Harry, would you tell us a little more about that?
Can I
Do you
borrow
need
your
this?
mic?
Yes, of
Okay.
course.
What I neglected to say during my presentation without notes, that I was told that the scrolls were there was a museum in Czechoslovakia during the war, during World War II, which was housing a whole bunch of Jewish artifacts, many, many scrolls, and it was eventually going into a museum for the extinct race of the Jews. And that was taken by the British after the war, and it was brought into England, and that's been, those Torahs, many of them have been distributed all over the world. I was told that these scrolls that I found in the ritual bath building, in the rafters of the ritual bath building, were supposed to be, so I was told, be part of this warehouse in Czechoslovakia, and for some reason it just never got there. When I found these scrolls, they were completely wrapped up, like you saw in some of the photographs, completely rolled up, and there was a lot of dirt, vermin. There was stuff left there from mice or rats, and the outer roll of the parchment was in such bad condition that it just had to be removed, and so you can have something you can work with. And that was buried ritually in a Jewish cemetery, like Torah scrolls that aren't able to be used anymore are. And then we started to come and try. We went to a scribe, also a rabbi, a scribe, actually several, and they even dated some of the scrolls. One of them was dated to be over 500 years old, from a German scribe, very different from many, many different Torah scrolls with the columns all set up differently. And the the thread, the sinew, that Dr. Mark was talking about. Some of them were in good condition because the whatever was in the inner roll of the scrolls was in pretty good shape. And they had to be gone over. Some of the threads had to be strengthened. I hope I'm answering your question, but that's the condition that we found them in, and what we were able to bring out in duffel bags that we brought the second year that we went. We brought out the majority of them, and that's what we were able to present to different scribes, and that was actually 15 of the scrolls were put together and made into holy scrolls that were reusable, restored, and in perfect condition.
Do you want to add anything?
Can I?
What the deer?
It's different parchment taken from a kosher animal. Certain animals have to be kosher by certain conditions that are set forth, and deer is one of them. Actually, when they use the parchment from the deer skin, it's much lighter than the parchment they use from other animals, and it's much easier to pick up and to handle because the Torah scroll has all these big columns, many columns, and it gets to be a very heavy thing, especially when every week we read a different part of the 5 books of Moses in the synagogue, and as you roll from the beginning, which you do around the holiday of Tabernacles, and Simchat Torah is the name of the holiday, and then when we get to the end, which is when Tabernacle starts again, so you can see that the scroll becomes very difficult to manage because of the weight gets disproportioned from one side of the scroll to the other.
Mark, did you want to add?
I just wanted to add that, this may provide a bit more context. So the scroll is made of deerskin, as Harry just mentioned, but deers are only so big. So the scroll is made of deerskin that's cut up into sections, and a complete scroll is made up of many sections. The many sections are sewn together. They're sewn together with actually deer veins, or sinews, I don't know the difference. But they're sewn together with a piece of deer. So it's all organic material. Then there's ink. There's different ways of making the ink. But I was worried that, over time, it would get brittle. And so that's why we brought it to the guy in Long Island, the scribe, who said, he deals with this stuff every day and it looks just fine. I mentioned plastic because so the scroll that I found that was originally mounted with the Torah was added on, after you brought it back. So you brought back just a scroll, and to display it, they found some poles and they put the poles on. And the plastic was a clue that told me these poles couldn't have belonged to those scrolls, because you wouldn't. It was just like a thin bit of plastic on top of the poles. The pole is called an Eitz Chaim. There was a thin bit of plastic with the name of the donor of the scroll. But in reality, it was just an old pole. It was actually a pretty new pole with a new piece of plastic on it. So it told me that this pole was much newer than the scroll. So ultimately, when we redid the exhibit, we left the poles out because the poles were just new things that were put on afterwards. They weren't original to the artifact. They weren't original to the Torah.
There's also one other piece of this, and then I'm going to go to an online question, then I'll come back to the audience here, which is that the Torah had been displayed since 2009 in a vitrine that doesn't have UV coating and literally baking in the heat and in the sun. And even during COVID, there was no air conditioning in the building. So this was a conversation that Dr. Hollywood and I had a lot, which was, what happens if we open the vitrine and the paper, because I'm not a Torah expert, disintegrates? Is this some religious faux pas? Is my soul gonna have a problem? I mean, this is a real conversation we're having. This is a religious
real questions
document.
about if something is a religious document,
Yeah.
who can handle it, what will happen to them, to the material.
Absolutely.
So these are real questions. Yeah.
And so this brings up the question that we received online, which is, are there any new artifacts that are in the process of being installed in the museum? So we have a really small staff. And the process that we've been talking about here, you can see how many people were involved. So the question now is, we are working with a consultant who has tremendous experience in looking at archives to analyze what we have in our workroom. And it's funny because at a larger museum, especially in Holocaust museums, people will say, we don't just have a workroom filled with stuff, we know everything that's back there. But smaller centers like the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, we don't necessarily know what's back there. In many cases, people came to us in the 80s and 90s and just gave us their things. We do have documentation for some of those things. A larger group of things we don't know where they came from. Some of the things we have finding aids for that can kind of help us figure it out. Other things we don't know. I could say truthfully there are some things in our permanent exhibition that need to have more research, and as in the next 2 years we look to redo our permanent exhibition, some of the existing artifacts will no longer be on display. I think it's much more important that we have pieces that we fully know the provenance for, the history for, and why they're there. And again, it really speaks to the different kinds of sizes of organizations. A smaller center is going to have far less staff to work on. So we're also not going to be accepting artifacts going forward. We don't necessarily have the resources to do them justice. So the things that we do have, we're going to treat with tremendous care, and the things that are here that we know what they are will eventually be donated. The last thing I will say is that occasionally we do get calls from people saying, I think my family member or a grand family member donated objects to your center. Do you have them? In the 80s and 90s, the first two directors of the center recorded testimonies with Holocaust survivors, over 250 of them, on audio cassette tapes. And it took a long time, and they sat in a closet for 40 years. And we were not able to digitize those. And at some point, the question about the tape, right? This is a college campus. For those of you that are members of the City University of New York, you often know our buildings sometimes don't have air conditioning, or things just go not so great with the atmosphere. So during the pandemic, we decided to donate those testimonies to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where eventually the tapes will be digitized and made available, as importantly, to a much wider group of people. So that's something we're thinking about. We recently had the children of a longtime volunteer here, and we actually did have their family papers, and we did have a finding aid, and we were able to connect them with these papers. And then the question will become, does the center retain the papers, or, because they're sitting in our workroom, do we decide through documentation to potentially return it to them? And that's a longer conversation in another episode.
More questions? Thank you, Laura. More questions from the audience? Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
So thank you all so much. I'm very moved by your story, and I feel like it's a story that I wish could be shared more, even into this venue. And I wonder if there's any plans, maybe for the exhibit. I feel like the whole story, even through the Torah as a vehicle of telling the story, is so profound. Is there any plan in the works, maybe for another exhibit or a larger forum to share the story?
Can I say one thing about the potential, and then I'll hand it back to you for the real answer? I will say, first of all, there's a very broad audience for these programs. So there's everybody in the room, there's everybody on there's everyone on Zoom now, and then these are available on YouTube in perpetuity. So, but I will also say, like I said in my introduction, I think one of the things, and I'm not a staff person here, so I'm saying this as an insider-outsider, that one of the things the center does very well is use individual objects and family histories with second and sometimes first generation and second generation survivors to tell various stories. So the center has had a series of really amazing exhibitions, including the one pertaining to the jacket that Laura mentioned, another one called The Conspiracy of Goodness that addressed a particular town that saved many, many children in France so the center does that very, very well. So maybe this instigates something in the future. Who knows? But I think that's a really good question. And the answer is people will have a lot of different ways to access this object and this story based on today's event. And I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe more.
we're thinking of, there'll most likely be an open house in the spring. We're still figuring out the date, and God willing, because this is a process for the Torah. Again, the next thing to be updated is the classroom of case studies. The 7 case studies that are up will remain, although they are being entirely rewritten, and there'll be 7 additional case studies. So if we can get this together by the end of the year, then we'll hopefully do an open house and time it with our Yom HaShoah commemoration, which is going to be focused on the International Holocaust Monument Survey, where Dr. Sam Gruber is going to come, and he surveyed thousands of monuments and memorials around the world to the Holocaust, from plaques to cemeteries to large monuments in cities, and is going to talk. So that's sort of the thinking for right now.
I think I saw another question. Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to ask about parchment. So parchment is animal skin, and so it lasts longer than paper, is that right?
It's a very good question, but let me also take the other question behind you at the same time, so that we can make sure we cover a bunch of different topics, if that's okay. No, go ahead. Let's hear both questions. Yes.
In the scroll, there was an opening which originally you thought was a brick. What's the purpose of that?
Those are two wonderfully connected. So the two questions were, go ahead, I'm sorry. We'll put them together.
The question is, what is the Orthodox Jewish and Ashkenazi Jewish, the woe of the scroll, is it a different meaning to it, or is it universal?
Okay, so we had a couple, I think those are all related to the material in some ways, so that's great. So the questions that we had were why the parchment of animal skin versus other types of paper material. And the other question was why the slit in the scroll itself, and is it different to different communities of Jewish people?
It's a good question. I don't know.
Let's get you a mic.
Yes.
Mike.
I'm sorry you don't have yours on.
Thank you. It's a good question. I don't know if I'm expert enough to answer your question, but this particular scroll, as I heard, I didn't know before, was made from deerskin. Not all of them are made from deerskin. Some are made from other animals which are kosher as well. Deerskin seems to be a popular one because the one that I mentioned that was 500 years old was also made from deerskin. And my understanding is the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic, the two different communities, the Eastern European community and the Spanish Jewish community, that they have the exact same scroll. They may be presented differently. The Sephardic scrolls are in some kind of metal case, and they're read from usually upright, and the case opens up, and it rolls, and you read it that way. The Ashkenazi community, it's usually on a table, like you see. It's usually on a table like you see in the photographs, and it's rolled by hand as you go from column to column. But they're all the 5 books of Moses, which comprise predominantly the most part of the Old Testament, besides the prophets and the Chronicles and all those other things that are involved. But the 5 books of Moses are read. Every week there's a different portion. You start with Genesis and you end with the last book of Deuteronomy, and every week there's a different portion that's read publicly among a forum in the synagogue on Saturdays, and also a smaller portion of that week's portion is read on Mondays and Thursdays. And then when Saturday comes, that whole particular portion is scheduled to be read in the synagogue. I don't know if that answers all the questions.
Do you want to add anything?
I think Mark can answer.
I'll add. I have a mic.
Oh, yes, go.
Yeah, I'll add just a few details. So, paper as compared to parchment, is a fairly new invention. There was papyrus in the olden days, but papyrus is a lot thinner, and it hardly lasts. We have, parchment could last hundreds of years, if properly taken care of, many hundreds of years. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, you may have heard of them. Those are parchment scrolls that we have every book of the Bible, plus a whole lot more, in parchment, on scrolls that are about 2,000 years old. There's one book that's not there, but we have all the books that you see in a standard Torah scroll, which is, so the Hebrew Bible is made up of the first 5 books of Moses, and then another book, another collection of prophetic books, and then another collection of writings. The Torah scroll is the first 5 books of Moses. What we have is a fragment of like just the last book. But the Dead Sea Scrolls have almost every one of these. They have all the 5 books, they have all the prophetic books, and they have almost all the writing books. So we have literally the same book that's 2,000 years old. I can't imagine there's paper that's that old. We have, except a few papyrus fragments. But yeah, paper wouldn't be as robust. Certainly it wouldn't last in a dank attic for any amount of time. So
Even if it were scrolled up all the way,
Yeah.
paper in the middle would still have been rotted.
I think we can't hear you without the, so let's, we have one or two more. Do you want to take another question from the, or, yeah.
actually, while this was going on, it dawned on me, I mean, I have to look this up, but you were saying, so on Saturday in the synagogue, a portion of the Torah scroll is read every week. And over the course of 52 weeks, they read the whole scroll. I would be willing to bet that, because you kept saying September, October. September, October time is roughly the time when they'd be in middle of Deuteronomy. I was just thinking, like this second, that when you roll up a scroll, you have 2 sides, the part that you've already read and the part that's still to be read. And I would suspect that around the time when the Nazis came in is roughly the part that's destroyed. And what was left is, and so it was, what we have is roughly the portion that would have been read around this time of year. So what we have left, so one side of the scroll is probably got ruined and the other side is preserved. So that would make sense. I'd have to look into the dates exactly to see if they stopped, we have a fragment of history of like where they were up to when it was read. We have to look into that.
Well, I had taken.
Can we get one more question? And
sure.
Just to, because I think we've got someone near the front, a faculty member. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, my question is for Harry, actually. I'm very curious and wondering if you could share a little bit more about the process of the discovery of the scrolls. Sure.
She'd like to hear a little bit more about the process of the discovery. Yeah, thank you.
I expect Indiana Jones.
So you might get that. When I originally came to Poland with my dad in 1980, with my wife and my dad, and she's away in Israel now for a wedding, otherwise she would be here. Adjacent to the Jewish cemetery was a Soviet munitions factory. Coincidentally, but that was there. So the whole cemetery was off limits, and we couldn't get there. And one of the people of the 3 Jewish people that I knew in the town at that time, he had access, he made himself in charge of Jewish affairs, and he had access to go to the military installation and get a couple of soldiers, Soviet soldiers, or maybe Polish soldiers, to take us to the cemetery and let us go into the cemetery. Years later, when I found about the Torah scrolls, this was 1980, then 1988, when I found the Torah scrolls, the wall didn't come down. Communism was still there in Poland at the time. And people were afraid to go and take me to show me where these scrolls were. So someone got the same guy, his son got the key, we went there. Like I said, communism was still.
How did you hear about
the same person, another friend of mine went to Poland, and the same person that took me to the cemetery took him to the cemetery time and said, by the way, I can show you where we have scrolls. And he came back from his trip to Poland, told me about it. That was May. That summer, my vacation, I didn't go to Jamaica, West Indies. I went to Poland, and that's when I saw that, and I brought them out. People were afraid at the time to give me permission to take them out. So this one Jewish fella in Częstochowa wrote a letter to the head of the Jewish community in Warsaw and said that they have given permission. They don't need scrolls for the 3 Jews that are left there. And that I am a descendant of Jews from Częstochowa, Poland, and he gave me the letter, and he let me take the stuff out of Częstochowa. First I went to Warsaw and got his permission. Then I came back and I retrieved them in case someone said, hey, these are our archives, which Poland actually did, but they gave me permission to take it out, and we brought it to, we went and we brought it to the airport. We were still afraid. Communism was still up, and they had a belt where you put things if you declare them leaving the country, and where you put another belt if you don't declare. So we practiced actually picking things up that were heavy and making them look light, even though we had permission, but we don't know what would happen there on this belt of customs leaving the country. And we were able to, and Penny, my wife and I, on the first trip, we split up at that point because we didn't want to have any trouble leaving the communist country, and she went to we met in Frankfurt. She went to Brussels, to Frankfurt, and I went straight to Frankfurt. We met at the airport, and that's when we put everything together. If you saw the Associated Press, I was working for the federal government at the time, and I had some friends in customs, and he said, we'll get you an agent in customs to get you through customs without any problem, because there was no restrictions bringing these archives into the United States, and with permission, there was no restrictions to take them out of the communist Poland at the time, but we were able to do that without any problems, and this is when I came back, and Dr. Schulman got a hold of me. At that time, I think I had already come back the second trip with the 31 scrolls, and we were ready taking the scrolls that we could use, the part of each scroll that we could use, to piece them together to make the 15 scrolls that we could be used ritually and repaired, and then whatever fragments we had, we started sending to different synagogues. You go into a synagogue, you'll see a scroll in the lobby, or different museums, and they're in a few different Holocaust museums all over the country. And happy to say that in 2011, there was a Jewish museum that opened up in Częstochowa, Poland, and one of the scrolls, which was intact, was sent back to Częstochowa, Poland, and it's now being exhibited in Częstochowa at a Jewish museum for everyone to see, that it went from Poland to the United States, and with me back to Poland for everyone to observe and to enjoy.
Thank you.
Yes, one more question.
Yeah, so I wanted to say, if you guys could highlight a little bit more the importance of not just sort of being Jewish, but also, like in both of your presentations, you really spoke a lot about, like, you had a lot of emotion in a lot of these slides. And for you, you said when you were like observing something on TV that as a Jewish person yourself, you said that it was like they got it wrong, and like, why didn't they ask me? How important is that, specifically working with artwork, and sort of can you talk about some things where you can't really learn about it in school? It's more so you have to sort of live it, or by having that ancestry, how important is that working?
That is a great question. So the question is, how important is it to have that ancestry or that personal relationship, and can you talk about what it was like seeing objects in museums that weren't necessarily correctly interpreted or identified, versus this kind of circumstance where you get to bring your own background, your religious background, your family history to the institution, to the object?
Want to take it?
Yeah, you can start.
Thanks. It's interesting. So in my life, I've handled dozens of these things. I've used them as they're normally used, ritualistically. And so for me, it's a sacred object. But I've used them over and over again, and like happens when you use sacred objects over and over again, you just get comfortable seeing them as normal. So in part, it's just it's a piece of an object I've used 100 times. On the other hand, I like you, we both have ancestors who could have used that as part of their lives, ancestors that are, were killed or, who went through the Holocaust in various ways. And so it's, in some sense, as an object itself, it may be less meaningful, but in some sense, it really may be quite meaningful. So as a sacred object, it seemed less so for me, but as a historical artifact, it seemed more so for me. And it is always weird. Just you referred to my experience watching these things on TV. It is always weird to see people get it wrong, and to see people understand it in the wrong way. And it's I'm glad that I could be part of contextualizing it for a museum where to explain how we think it should be, or how we tend to think of it. So yeah, great question.
I also want to mention, I grew up religious, but I don't practice at all. And so this is a little awkward because Mark and I went to go visit this scribe, and I'm coming in kind of hot with a business card, and I need an invoice, and I'm like, all right, let's talk about the project. And we're walking into a religious space, and there are very gendered roles that are taking place there, and it becomes very clear very quickly that I need to step back, let the men speak, and let the process unfold. And that was also kind of interesting to me because it was a reminder, the work that we're doing here at the center, if this was just a Torah scroll, it wouldn't necessarily have a place here. The center is focused on Holocaust education. And what's critical about this Torah piece is that it's connected to Jewish identity, but it also has a direct connection to the Holocaust. And so in the copy itself, being able to describe what the Torah is, and which is a question that students will ask a lot and is coming up more given the political climate. There'll be a lot more questions about Jewish identity, but that's not the focus of the center. And so there's all these sort of nuances to doing the work, and it was just very telling that day. Even myself just being there, I think there was a question about what our relationship was. It was a little, there was some awkwardness for sure.
And you're right. In a project like, you did a great job managing this project, but in a project like this, you're dealing with religious scribes who deal with religious objects, and that's their life, and you're dealing with people who, carpenters who build things, and you're dealing with experts in putting museum things together, and so there's a dizzying array of kinds of people who have to be negotiated in order to put a project like this together. And I mean, you did a great, you must have done a good, it was invisible to me, but because I only dealt with my part, and you dealt with your part, but you made all the magic happen. So yeah, good job.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand back the mic to Laura to close that out and just thank, but just before that, just thank you so much for the time and for making us all understand this object and its history and its care and its display so in such a deep way. And also thank the folks who are here for taking your time to learn and to ask such incredibly thoughtful questions that bring us to such a nice conclusion to think about how some objects like this are returned and some are here for us to learn from, and and also why it's important for institutions to encourage to include people with firsthand information and specialized knowledge in these kinds of processes. So thank you all for being a part of this today, and thank you for inviting me in, Laura.
Thank you so much, Kat. Thank you to everyone who attended. I just want to mention, thank you to Harry, thank you to Mark. So this event will be posted online in a couple of days. Our next event is also focusing on Holocaust memory. It's online and in person, and we are going to be talking about Holocaust memorials erected by Jewish burial societies, meaning the societies that come out of communities that were destroyed. And these are ways that they commemorate the people in their communities. And then we will also be running our annual KHC National Endowment for the Humanities Colloquium, and this time it is entitled Artists and Academics Escaping Nazism. And later in the semester we have a conversation with a scholar talking about Argentina, the Jewish population there, and the different kinds of experiences that they had. Thank you all. We hope you stay safe and be well.
Thank you.